Okay, I think we can get started. First thing, I will warn you, King Lear is coming. We will get to King Lear next Tuesday, and I just want you to know it is longer than any of the plays we've read thus far, particularly these comedies we've just been reading. It's about 50% longer, so allow a little extra time. It's only the greatest play ever written, and it's more complicated. You want to leave a little more time for reading it. As for Twelfth Night, I don't know of any really good version. There's one that's readily available, directed by Trevor Nunn, with the great Ben Kingsley as Feste. It's a very dark version of the comedy, and in that sense, a bit misleading. I don't remember the BBC version. I gather it's pretty good and uncut. I noticed two versions are on YouTube for free. There's one directed by Kenneth Branagh. I don't know much about it. The reviews say at least that it's virtually uncut. The one I'm intrigued by that I didn't know existed and that I'll now watch when I get a chance is an earlier one. It has an unbelievable cast. Three of the great actors of the British theater of the 20th century, and Alec Guinness, whom you may know as Obi-Wan Kenobi, plays Malvolio. That's evidently heavily cut, but my guess is if you're going to watch one, that's the one to watch. Okay, I'm going to say a few more words about As You Like It, and then turn to Twelfth Night. I was a little rushed in talking about Jake last time, and I do think it's useful to analyze Jake to point out what Shakespeare is not. That is, Jake represents a path that Shakespeare doesn't take. Jake is a nihilist. He is very sour and bitter about the human condition. Shakespeare is aware of all the problems that Jake is aware of. After all, he created him as a character. And in general, we've seen that Shakespeare is quite critical of the world. He sees all the injustice in the world. He sees how phony the aristocracy can be, how in many cases the people that rule the world don't deserve to do so. But his reaction isn't to reject the world root and branch as Jake does. As I said, it's an unbelievable irony that 7 Ages of Man speech is actually on the wall of the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., as if this speech distills Shakespeare's wisdom. It is simply a horrible view of humanity as pointless and worthless, and Shakespeare himself contradicts it by having the very vital, the old figure of Adam come out and show that old age isn't as bad as Jake points it out to be. And the main thing to see about that speech is that Jake feels there is only role playing. There's no reality to human identity. We're just playing roles. Now, Shakespeare is very aware of role playing. He was an actor himself and a playwright, and a lot of his plays deal, as we've seen, with role playing. But role playing, as I was suggesting last time, is a means. It's a way of working through your problems in comedy to getting to a solution. As we'll be seeing next week with King Lear, Shakespeare is so aware of the gap between nature and convention in human life. We've been seeing it from the very beginning with Richard II, a man who is by convention king but doesn't have the true kingly nature. It's the fundamental problem in politics for Shakespeare that convention doesn't always align with nature. And the comedies, as I've been showing you, are an attempt to try to realign convention with nature by getting out of the world of convention into a more natural world. But the aim of the comedies is to get you back into the conventional world, so that we return to Athens in Midsummer Night's Dream, and we were going to return to the court at the end of As You Like It. Jake takes a position that you should just give up on convention, that it's all merely convention, therefore just roles that we can adopt. Jake has complete contempt for the world as it exists. We see this in an early dialogue. If you remember, if you brought As You Like It, it's on page 40. In any case, it's Act 2, Scene 7, about line 58. This is when he announces that he's going to reform the world, that give him the privilege of a fool to criticize society, to be a kind of social satirist. He says, invest me in my motley, give me leave to speak my mind, and I will through and through cleanse the foul body of the infected world if they will patiently receive my medicine. Now, that's, of course, a big if, and explains why this reform isn't going to happen. What I want you to see is that Jake is the kind of person who wants to reform the world through and through. The world is infected. It needs to be cleansed. It's a foul body. This is a kind of radical reform. Now, I think Shakespeare, by contrast, works from within. He doesn't stand outside society and criticize it, root and branch, and say we have to do away with it. He's more interesting in what we might call gradual reform, fine-tuning, and indeed, as so often happens in the play, Jake is criticized for this attitude, and Duke Sr. points out, still on page 40, so line 64 in the scene, most mischievous foul sin in chiding sin, for thou thyself hast been a libertine, as sensual as the Brutus sting itself, and all the embossed sores and headed evils that thou with license of the free foot hast caught, wouldst thou disgorge into the general world. So the Duke points out that Jake criticizes the world for faults he himself shares. He acts as if he stands outside the world, some kind of Archimedean point from which he can reform it, as if he were Puck, as if he could stand outside the world and say what fools these mortals be. But he's just another foolish mortal. And Shakespeare's comedy is much more generous to humanity than Jake's. Jake despises humanity, and Shakespeare does not. He wouldn't write this kind of comedy if he did. I suspect that there were moments when he got up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning and had a little bit of despite for humanity. And you'll see it surface in moments in King Lear. On the other hand, his broad general position is to make fun of human beings, but not to ridicule them. And I hope you've seen the gentleness of the comedy, which accepts our humanity even in the process of criticizing it. And so Shakespeare's position is not to reject everything and just to say, oh, it's all pure convention and it's got no meaning, the way Jacques does. And in fact, he has a little dialogue between Jacques and Rosalind to point up this contrast. This is on pages 73 to 74. It's the opening scene of Act 4. When Rosalind is interrogating Jacques, they say, you are a melancholy fellow. And Jake says, I am so. I do love it better than laughing. And here we see the embracing of melancholy, the rejection of laughter, and Jake insists, why, 'tis good to be sad and say nothing. And Rosalind replies, why then 'tis good to be a post. A block of wood is as good as you if the goal is to say nothing. And then he goes on to explain his melancholy, and around line 15, he says it's extracted from many objects, and indeed the sundry contemplation of my travels, in which my often rumination wraps me in a most humorous sadness. Jacques is a traveler. And the traveling is the source of his melancholy. And indeed, Rosalind seizes upon this. Line 20 in Act 4, Scene 1. A traveler, by my faith, you have great reason to be sad. I fear you have sold your own lands to see other men's. Then to have seen much and to have nothing is to have rich eyes and poor hands. And that is Jacques. A traveler, a foreigner in his own land. Those of you who know Hamlet, Hamlet is something like that. Hamlet is someone who despises Denmark and criticizes its customs. He's traveled too much in his mind. And here, what Rosalind says, I fear you have sold your own lands to see other men's. and then to have seen much and to have nothing is to have rich eyes and poor hands. You've destroyed your own life by losing your roots. You're homeless. You have no home anymore. And Jacob says, yes, I have gained my experience. And Rosalind says, and your experience makes you sad. I'd rather have a fool to make me merry than experience to make me sad. That's very much the spirit of Shakespeare's comedies. Now, do remember he wrote tragedies. This is a man who understood human suffering and the misery in the world, and we'll see this in King Lear. But I keep saying he also wrote comedies, and you can see why, because the spirit of his comedies is, I would rather have a fool to make me merry than experience to make me sad. And then as Jacob leaves, line 31, Rosalind says, farewell, Monsieur Traveller. Look you lisp and wear strange suits. Disable all the benefits of your own country. Be out of love with your nativity. Disable all the benefits of your own country. Be out of love with your nativity. You cannot lead a happy life if that's your attitude. And we see that this famous 7 Ages of Man speech omits everything that in fact makes life bearable, that makes life meaningful, such as falling in love, getting married, having children, having them aid you in your old age, going to school and learning something, and so on. It's much more significant what Jacob omits in that speech than what he mentions. So I think Shakespeare builds into this play this character who takes such a negative perspective on human life to show us that it's incompatible with comedy. And Jacob can't be included in the happy ending. He voluntarily leaves, and indeed leaves with a religious convertite, as if this position of his represents something akin to a religious renunciation of the world that sees this world as evil and corrupt and in itself unredeemable. Again, Shakespeare's not naive and certainly not naively optimistic, yet his comedies represent some hope that human life can be happy, that people can achieve a form of happiness. And one way he explores this is by the possibility of getting conventions back in touch with nature. It's a deep problem that our conventions often stand between us and our natural feelings. That's what he shows about love conventions, that they get it all wrong. That this Petrarchan view of love leads to people suffering in love instead of enjoying it. But the fact that one set of conventions is wrong doesn't mean that all sets of conventions are wrong. And indeed, Shakespeare's comedies especially are a search for a better set of conventions in love. Again, all conventions are not equal. And Shakespeare is not a relativist. I showed you that with Corinne's statement about how the manners in the country don't work in the court and the manners in the court don't work in the country. That's not a statement of the relativity of conventions. It's of the fitness of conventions to specific situations. And it says that the manners of the country work in the country and the manners of the court work in the court. It just don't get them mixed up. And indeed, we'll see this in a tragic way in King Lear, Shakespeare's search for a way to find a more natural basis for politics, as in some ways we've explored in the histories as well. So Shakespeare doesn't simply despise conventions the way Jacob does. He creates a character who does despise conventions to see that that's not the right route. In fact, conventions are necessary in love. Love requires poetry. A love without poetry is orgy and touchstone. It's the mere copulation of cattle. Love requires poetry. But maybe it could have a better poetry than the stilted, artificial Petrarchan love poetry. Maybe it would be a poetry moderated and modified by a kind of prose, as we see with Orlando and Rosalind. So the hope here is to reform the conventions of love with the understanding that you can't eliminate them entirely. Every people we know has patterns of courtship, has conventions that make it possible for human beings, men and women, to get together and get over the difficulties of a man and a woman relating. Those courtships, those conventional courtships vary from society to society. Indeed, they look laughable from one society to another, but that doesn't mean they're meaningless and ridiculous. And again, one could say some methods of courtship are better or more natural than others. So this is the utopian nature of Shakespearean romantic comedy, that it offers us an image of a proper love, of a truly natural love. Shakespeare knows that none of us are going to achieve what Rosalind and Orlando do. We're never going to have quite that opportunity to find the forest of Arden and these disguises that allow us to overcome the obstacles to love. But you can say it's worth showing what this would be like. What a love that combined refinement and spontaneity. What a love that combined poetry and prose. Let's put it up on the stage so we can see it. We may never be able to achieve it in the full synthesis that Rosalind and Orlando achieved. But once we see it, it can be a kind of guide to us, a kind of touchstone, so that we can see that the love of Sylvius and Phoebe is wrong, and the love of Audrey and Touchstone is inadequate, and see what an ideal love would be like. So again, these comedies do not attempt to portray reality. They portray a kind of romantic ideal by which we can at least take our bearings in these much more complicated lives that we human beings lead. Okay. Let me move on now to Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night is the real challenge to this course, in the sense that it's the least political of the plays we're doing. In a way, it is preposterous to put this in a course on Shakespeare and politics. Your introduction, your edition, does a good job of discussing the ways in which Twelfth Night is a mere bagatelle, and it needs to be enjoyed for what it is, a very funny play and marvelous romp when staged well. Nevertheless, on Thursday I'm going to get very serious politically about it, because I'm going to discuss religion in the play, and I will show you that I think it actually has a very important political aspect to it. But I want to keep it non-political today, although I may get to the religious issue by the end, just to show you how I think it fits into what we've been doing, namely that the subject of love is always political for Shakespeare, in the sense that it deals with this political problem of eros. And I think that Twelfth Night reveals most clearly what Shakespeare is doing in his comedies, namely trying a kind of thought experiment. Let's see what life is like when we abstract from this tremendously complicating factor of politics, which often makes life tragic, as Shakespeare shows. And here, let's see what a love would be like in a world with no non-love problems. And it turns out these lovers are going to screw things up anyway. This is the perversity of human love for Shakespeare, that people get themselves in trouble even when there's no basis for it anymore. And in particular, we've seen, we've had relatively peaceful situations in these comedies, relatively abstracted from politics. But in Midsummer Night's Dream, the father forbade the love of Hermia and Lysander, and Duke Theseus intervened. And As You Like It, we have some complications with family opposing certain link-ups and therefore political figures imposing them. In this case, the Duke falls in love. There's no Duke to forbid him loving Olivia. He is the Duke. There's no parents involved. Olivia's got no... She could certainly reciprocate. This guy's the Duke, after all. She doesn't have any family objecting to it. It seems like, okay, all right, there's no obstacles. Famously, in this kind of comedy, new comedy, there's some kind of obstacle, usually some kind of old man that blocks the lovers from fulfillment, but nothing like that this time. And so we're forced to see that these lovers will create problems even if there aren't any. And it's partially because of this whole image of love they have, that love should be torture. This whole Petrarchan idea that it ain't love if you ain't suffering. And again, it makes it clear. It's like Romeo and Juliet say, "Oh, it's those damn parents of ours," and Hermia and Lysa, "Oh, it's that father of Jesus." But if Olivia and Duke Orsino can't get together, it's their own fault, as indeed Shakespeare is showing. This is this kind of self-generating misery in love because they love it. Now, the play does take place in a kind of utopian space. It's Illyria, which makes it the Adriatic coast, which seems pretty remote from Shakespeare to us. But in fact, I will say that the Adriatic coast was part of the Venetian Empire in Shakespeare's lifetime. So pretty important and more developed, I guess you could say, than it is now. What's now Dubrovnik was then Ragusa, and Ragusa was the second largest or second most important city in the Venetian commercial empire. It's one reason Shakespeare has Italians in the play. That looks weird to us, but the Adriatic coast was Italian in Shakespeare's lifetime. Again, most of it controlled by Venice. So it's funny when you look at these things. Illyria seems like the most remote and fantastical spot. Actually, Shakespeare probably had met some people from Ragusa. Obviously met some people from Venice anyway, but still, it's pretty lightly sketched in as a setting. And what we meet is this Duke Orsino who is in love with love. This is the very opening of the play, page 3, Act 1, Scene 1. Again, very famous lines, but I think generally misinterpreted. If music be the food of love, play on. Give me excess of it, that surfeiting the appetite may sicken and so die. That strain again, it had a dying fall. Now again, if music be the food of love, play on. That's become a very famous line. But what Shakespeare emphasized here is the decadence of all this. Give me excess of it, that appetite might sicken and so die. And he emphasizes the dying fall, the falling cadence of the music. What we see here is one of these typical Petrarchan lovers who is completely wrapped up in the wonderful experience of suffering and love, and himself chronicles the dying of love, even in his celebration of it, line 7, enough no more, 'tis not so sweet now as it was before. It's already in decline, and we learn line 14, it falls into abatement and low price, even in a minute. He loves hearing music as the background to his love because the music has a dying fall. And he's absorbed in this moment of the dying of his love. And then someone asks him, this is page 4, line 16, will you go hunt, my lord? Now, hunting was a very important activity of the aristocracy in Shakespeare's day. It's hard for us to imagine how important hunting was in Renaissance culture, but it was thought of as preparation for war. Machiavelli talks about that. It's a good, healthy activity to get out and have some physical exercise. Will you go hunt, my lord? What, Curio? The guy is like in a fog here, the fog of Petrarchan love. What, Curio? The heart. Now, here comes a pun. Heart means dear, but of course it also means heart. Why, so I do, the noblest that I have. Oh, when mine eyes did see Olivia first, methought she purged the air of pestilence. That instant was I turned it into a heart, and my desires like fell and cruel hounds ere since pursue me. Now, in fact, the use of hunting imagery in Petrarchan poetry was very common. There's a very famous sonnet by Sir Thomas Wyatt called Whoso Lists to Hunt. Shakespeare is playing upon that aspect of this poetic tradition here. In any case, you see, here's a man who's not out hunting. He's pining away for his beloved Olivia. And this is not the best course of action for a duke who should be leading his people. Indeed, on page 5, the end of the scene, Act 1, Scene 1, away before me to sweet beds of flowers, love thoughts lie rich when canopied with bowers. It's like, well, that was enough activity for a day. I'm going back to bed. What we see here is a kind of paralysis here. And again, he's so wrapped up in the experience of love, not actively seeking out this woman. There's something very solipsistic and even narcissistic about this form of love. So this is the kind of impasse we've been talking about that this Petrarchan notion of love generates. Against it is the corresponding dead end that Olivia has ended up in. In her case, it's mourning, mourning. So on page 4, so Act 1, Scene 1, about line 29, we learn, but like a cloistress, she will veiled walk and water once a day her chamber round with eye-offending brine, all this to season a brother's dead love, which she would keep fresh and lasting in her sad remembrance. Now, she's a cloistress. She's in a self-imposed nunnery, we would say. Now, we saw this as a threat in the beginning of A Midsummer Night's Dream, that if Hermia didn't listen to her father, she'd end up in a nunnery. And again, this is, you see the connection between the sterility of this conception of love and a kind of monastic, ascetic understanding of the world that we associate with Christianity. And notice she's watering with eye-offending brine. All these images of agriculture here, watering and all this to season, they're images of sterility. It's salt water. Nothing's growing here. And indeed, that's the problem with Olivia here. We learn page 6, so Act 1, Scene 2, line 40, they say she hath abjured the sight and company of men. So we've got two people at dead ends here. Orsino is so wrapped up in the joys of suffering love that he barely can get out of bed. And Olivia, who has locked herself off from the company of men, mourning for her brother. Now, it's okay to mourn for your brother. Shakespeare understands that. But this has gotten unnatural. She is rejecting all of life in memory of her brother. Page 7, Sir Toby Belch, this is so Act 1, Scene 3, says, what a plague means my niece to take the death of her brother thus. I am sure care's an enemy to life. Remember, in comedy, the standard is life. We must go on living no matter what happens. And although it's okay to mourn, not if it becomes excessive here and where Olivia's mourning has become an excuse for not getting on with her own life. Now, I want to cite a passage from Hamlet to help us again grasp the difference between comedy and tragedy. In tragedy, mourning's for real. Hamlet is mourning for his father. In many ways, the precondition for the play. Hamlet's father is a great man. We know a lot about him. We know why Hamlet's mourning for him. In the case of Olivia, we don't even know her brother's name. Shakespeare knows what he's doing. He keeps Olivia's brother a cipher. If we knew more about him, we could maybe get into this morning. But we don't. Now here's Hamlet in Act 1, Scene 2 has this very interesting exchange where Gertrude is trying to get Hamlet out of his mourning. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st his common. All that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. And Hamlet says very bitterly, I, madam, it is common. And Gertrude says, if it be, why seems it so particular with thee? And there's the tragic hero for you. He's not common. There's something particular to him. And indeed, Hamlet, we see as a deeply sensitive and profound man. He has a reason to be mourning his father. Gertrude tries to point to comedy, to the commonality of human experience. Thou knowst is common. All that lives must die. And Claudius joins in the act. 'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these mourning duties to your father. But now Claudius launches into the world of comedy. But you must know your father lost a father, that father lost his, and the survivor bound in filial obligation for some term to do obsequious sorrow. There it is. Your experience isn't unique. Your father lost his father, that father lost his father, continuity of generations. Everyone has to face up to this. We have to move on. And then this speech by Claudius, but to persever, to do obsequious sorrow, but to persever in obstinate condolence is a course of impious stubbornness. Remember what I said? To the comic figure, the tragic hero looks stubborn. And here it is, but to persever in obstinate condolence is a course of impious stubbornness. For what we know must be, it is as common as any the most vulgar thing to sense. Why should we in our peevish opposition take it to heart? It is to reason most absurd, whose common theme is death of fathers. I bring this up because you can see, comedy deals with common themes, with the universal human experiences, what everybody goes through generation after generation. And that's why we have to move on. Tragedy distills out this unique moment, a unique person dealing with a unique experience. I think this is a wonderful way of seeing the difference between comedy and tragedy. And here in Twelfth Night, we are forced to conclude that Olivia's attachment to her brother is superficial, because the moment a handsome young man shows up in her court, she's hot for him and starts pursuing Viola, as it turns out, in the person of Cesario. We quickly realize that the mourning was a facade. It was an excuse to turn away Orsino and all his persistent love suits. Moreover, we see in Viola's behavior how you react to a brother's death. She, in effect, mourns it more or is affected more deeply by it than Olivia is, but she knows she has to move on. Moreover, she maintains hope that she will regain her brother. Indeed, she jumps at the first sign that he might still be alive. So again, Shakespeare constructs these plays well, so we can see that, abstractly you might say, okay, it's all right for Olivia to mourn for her brother, but really Shakespeare shows how that's the same psychology that Duke Orsino is manifesting. These characters enjoy suffering. And moreover, it's just become a kind of habit to them. Every day, Orsino sends off another love message to Olivia. It's rejected. And he says, okay, that's enough for today. And every day she mourns and rejects the message from Orsino. I think Shakespeare is actually very astute here, understanding human psychology, that in fact there's a kind of inertia to sorrow. This is something that therapists will point out when they try to break people out of clinical melancholy, that it just can become a habit. It becomes safe It's like your life becomes controllable because it's all sorrow. And that is particularly not healthy for the community when it's blocking the romances in this world. So into this world, Shakespeare introduces the shake-up factor, something that will make the world go topsy-turvy and help people to break out of this impasse that they've somehow gotten themselves into. And in this case, it's going to be a pair of identical twins with the slight difference that one is a boy and one is a girl. And again, we're going to have a girl dress up as a boy. Viola will dress up as Cesario. As I mentioned, with boys playing these female parts, Shakespeare, particularly at this point of his career, would often allow the male actor the boy actor a relief by having him play a boy for much of the play. But again, it goes deeper than that. And once again, notice that it's a woman who saves the day. That Viola is the character who really takes the lead in getting the Illyrians out of their romantic impasse here. We saw this with Rosalind. It's also true of the character Portia in Merchant of Venice. I've been trying to track down this source. I think I read it in a comment on Amazon.com on one of Shakespeare's plays, but it really intrigues me, this formulation, that for Shakespeare, tragedy is when men rule the world, comedy is when women rule the world. That is, and it has something to do with the predominance of thumos in tragedy and eros in comedy, but in the history plays, and King Lear we'll see, and all of Shakespeare's tragedies, it's largely a masculine world, not completely a masculine world. There's Lady Macbeth, there's Cleopatra, we'll see Goneril and Regan and Cordelia in King Lear, but still you can say tragedy is this political world governed by thumos and in which men are contending for honor. In the comedies, the women seem to understand eros better than the men. We saw that in Orlando being instructed by Rosalind. We're going to see something similar here between Duke Orsino and Viola. And I think it may well be that women understand the family better, or understand the goal of eros. The goal of eros is generation, and the family, women are closer to that than men. And in general, the women set out to produce a happy ending. They want to get out of the impasse. They want to resolve things. They want to free up the erotic energies. The men often have the stubbornness we associate with tragic heroes, and the women often have the flexibility we associate with comic heroes. And I think it's a pattern that's been insufficiently appreciated in Shakespeare's comedies, how much they are dominated by the cleverness and the flexibility and the adaptability of characters like Viola, Rosalind, and again I'll add Portia in The Merchant of Venice. So Viola, by masquerading as Cesario, sets up a process that will resolve things. And once again, as in As You Like It, the model for romantic love turns out to be friendship. It's as if Shakespeare is saying romantic love needs to be a bit more like friendship between men and women and women. And as we've seen a number of plays, he holds that up as an ideal. And in this play as well, the friendship of Antonio and Sebastian is presented as a very deep relationship. In many ways superior to, say, the relationship of Orsino and Olivia. I say that because Antonio in particular really cares a lot about Sebastian. He's willing to risk his life for him. He aids him in many ways. He provides him with money when he needs it, and he even risks his life to show up in Illyria because he can't be without Sebastian and because he's afraid Sebastian is in trouble. There's a kind of activity to that friendship that is lacking in the utter passivity of Orsino's love for Olivia. I mean, he's the true Petrarchan lover because he loves her from a distance. He sends her telegrams and Instagrams and emails and whatever. He never shows up at her doorstep. The first time a male shows up at her doorstep, Olivia goes gaga for Cesario. At least a guy who's willing to walk a few blocks to see me. Something so static and uncommunicative about Orsino's love. And so what we see is that these two affairs, what turns out to be the Duke Orsino Viola affair and the what turns out to be the Olivia Cesario, therefore Sebastian affair, they are set in motion by a situation that's more akin to friendship than to romantic love. By that I mean that when Orsino meets the person who will eventually learn is Olivia, is Viola, he thinks it's a boy, Cesario, and they become friends remarkably quickly. Look at page 13. So this is Act 1, Scene 4. Very opening here, Valentine says to Cesario, if the Duke continue these favors towards you, Cesario, you are like to be much advanced. He hath known you but 3 days, and already you are no stranger. He's known Olivia for years, and they're still strangers. We don't even know if they've ever met. Maybe they met at a masked ball one day in Venice. But here it is, 3 days, and they're no strangers. Indeed, further down, page 13, Act 1, Scene 4, line 11, stand you a while loose, Cesario, thou knowest no less but all. Stand you a while aloof, he says to everyone else, then, Cesario, thou knowest no less but all. I've unclasped to thee the book even of my secret soul. 3 days. 3 days, and they're sharing the secrets of their souls. And indeed, I think the point here that Shakespeare is making is that in many ways two men can get along together because all that apparatus of romantic love isn't there. They can speak, as we would say, as man to man. Again, we saw this with Orlando and Ganymede in As You Like It. So this means that Orsino meets Viola in a masculine form, Cesario, someone he can become friends with before they become lovers. Shakespeare suggests, it would be nice if the man and woman knew each other, if they'd actually met before they formed this great attachment as Orsino does long distance with Olivia. Now, similarly, Cesario shows up as the messenger from Orsino to Olivia. This is on page, 21, page 21, Act 1, Scene 5, about line 166. Now, the goal from Shakespeare's point of view is to break down these artificial love conventions. And unwittingly, Cesario does a great job of it, or Viola. This is, again, page 21, Act 1, Scene 5, line 166. The honorable lady of the house, which is she? Now, well, you'll see what I mean. Oh, speak to me, I shall answer for her, you will. Most radiant, exquisite, and unmatchable beauty. I pray you tell me if this be the lady of the house, for I never saw her. Now, if she is a radiant, exquisite, and unnatural beauty, you can pick her out in a crowd. You're not supposed to. You're about to address your message to the most beautiful woman in the world. You're not supposed to show up and say, well, which one of you is this most beautiful woman in the world? If she were truly the Petrarchan love goddess, anyone could pick her out of a crowd. So this is a marvelously funny moment. The Honorable Lady of the House, which is she? And then I pray you tell me if this be the lady of the house, for I never saw her. I would be loath to cast away my speech, for besides that it is excellently well penned, I have taken great pains to con it. That is, to memorize it. Now, this is a terrible admission here, that there's actually a pre-existent text of this love. Petrarchan love is supposed to be spontaneous. It's supposed to be a tribute that wells up from the depths of the soul to the beloved. Viola violates all the conventions of romantic love here by pulling out the text and saying, oh yeah, I got this sonnet to read to you. We just had it written for us, you know. It's a wonderful, it's a marvelous moment when she mentions the well-penned speech and how she's memorized it. It suggests the textuality of this Petrarchan love, that it doesn't exist in real emotion and in honest, spontaneous interchange between man and woman. It's just another text, another poem. Now, I don't know if Shakespeare knew this, but I was very surprised to discover, again, this is Illyria, the Adriatic coast. There was Serbo-Croatian Petrarchan love poetry. My colleague at Virginia, Gordon Braden, who's the world's greatest expert on Petrarchanism, wrote a book, and he actually discovered there's a whole volume of Petrarchan love sonnets. I think it was published in 1507, and they're in Serbo-Croatian. Again, I doubt Shakespeare knew this, but Shakespeare divines these things. Even in Illyria, the Petrarchan texts are prevalent, and Shakespeare makes a lot of jokes with the Petrarchan conventions in this sequence. Page 24, Viola points, again, always in her character's Cesario, this is Act 1, Scene 5, about line 240, to nature. And nature, in the case of Eros, means generation. 'Tis beauty truly blent, whose red and white nature's own sweet and cunning hand laid on. Lady, you are the cruelest she alive, if you will lead these graces to the grave and leave the world no copy. What she's saying is, you're so beautiful, have children. We need copies of your beauty. Now, it's very interesting that Shakespeare's sonnets begin with just this sequence. He's writing to a young man, possibly the Earl of Southampton, but he's urging him to marry and saying, you're so good looking, you can't take these good looks to the grave. Let's have some children here to preserve your good looks. And again, it is the typical Shakespearean critique of Petrarchanism that it ignores the function of Eros, which is generation. Now, Olivia is very snide about it. This is line 244. O sir, I will not be so hard-hearted. I will give out diverse schedules of my beauty. It shall be inventoried, and every particle and utensil labeled to my will as item, 2 lips in different red, item, 2 gray eyes with lids to them, item, 1 neck, 1 chin, and so forth. She's making fun here of a Petrarchan poetic trope. It's called the blazon, B-L-A-Z-O-N. It actually, Shakespeare makes fun of it in that sonnet number 130 I read to you. I'll just repeat that quickly. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. That is, in this Petrarchan trope, you go down the form of your beauty and say how beautiful her eyes are, how beautiful her hair is, how beautiful her lips are, and so on. Very standard. Shakespeare's making fun of it in that sonnet, and he has Olivia make fun of it here, that as item two lips and different red, item two grazed eyes with lids thin. She's heard a lot of Petrarchan poetry, and she's sick of it, because she knows it leads nowhere. It's just a lot of poetry. And indeed, earlier, this is page 22, line 191, Olivia says, "Come to what is important, and I forgive you the praise." Viola says, "Alas, I took great pains to study it, and 'tis poetical." This speech she's brought, and Olivia says, "It is more like to be feigned." And again, we saw this dialogue between Touchstone and Audrey in As You Like It, the issue of how lying the poets can be. And so we're in this typical situation when nothing's going to happen until Viola drops the prepared text. And then, this is line 265, if I did love you in my master's flame, with such a suffering, such a deadly life, in your denial I would find no sense. I would not understand it. I would not take no for an answer. Orsino's been taking no for an answer for years, evidently. And what does it say about his love that he does take no for an answer? And Olivia's a little surprised here. This isn't typical Petrarchan love poetry behavior. Why would you? And finally, Viola shows a little youthful energy here. "Make me a willow cabin at your gate, and call upon my soul within the house. Write loyal cantons of contented love, and sing them loud even in the dead of night. Hallow your name to the reverberant hills, and make the babbling gossip of the air cry out, Olivia! Oh, you would not rest between the elements of air and earth, but you should pity me." And Olivia says, "You might do much. What is your parentage?" She's immediately interested. And indeed, "Oh, get you to your Lord, I cannot love him. Let him send no more, unless perchance you come to me again." That's how fast it happens. Just one sign of youthful exuberance, of sexual impetuosity, if I may say so. And Olivia, forget about her dead brother. Forget about Orsino. She's got the hots here for young Cesario. And, that's what love's about. It's about youthful energy. And indeed, it will not. So now again, she's not going to marry Viola. She's going to marry Sebastian. But Sebastian looks just like Cesario. And again, the point is that they've overcome this impasse that Olivia and Orsino was in, because Viola, in the person of Cesario, has actually shown up, and some kind of communication can take place, and some kind of energy can be introduced in the love. And so she gets to meet Sebastian in a tamer form, if you will, in this feminine form that's less threatening to her. And it's going to allow a marvelous resolution to this romantic impasse that's developed in the play. Let me put it to you this way. If Orsino and Olivia were to marry, there would be a question of who got the better deal. Since one was getting Olivia and one was getting Orsino. But the way this play works out, they get the same thing. They both get this curious being, Cesario, who is Viola and Sebastian. They both get the same deal. And it is interesting that in particular, they both get someone younger and of a lower social status. The one thing we learn about Olivia in the play is that she wants to marry someone beneath her. This is an interesting detail we get early in the play. Page 11, Act 1, Scene 3, line 106. Toby actually explains what the problem is. She'll none of the count. She'll not match above her degree, neither in estate, years, nor wit. I have heard her swear to it. So this is when he's trying to convince Andrew Aguecheek that he has a shot at marrying Olivia. But no, if she married the Duke, she would be subordinating herself to him. He's the man, he's the Duke, he's older. She gets a better deal by marrying Sebastian eventually because she's older, she's more socially prominent. She will perhaps not dominate the relationship, but she'll have more of a shot at it than she would if she subordinated herself to a Duke. Similarly, the Duke in marrying Olivia might have some problems because she's pretty high-born, and we see that she has a high opinion of herself. And in discussing this, this is page 39 with Viola Cesario. The Duke insists on this too. This is Act 2, Scene 4, line 29. Let still the woman take an elder than herself. So wears she to him, so sways her level on her husband's heart. For boy, however we do praise ourselves, our fancies are more giddy and firm, wrong wavering suitor lost yours than women's are. So we see here that he wants a woman that will be subordinate to him. Indeed, what's really interesting that emerges in this sequence is this great Petrarchan lover, this great worshiper of women in the abstract, has utter contempt for real women. Again, I think Shakespeare is really so interesting in exposing the psychology of this poetry, this kind of poetry. Because look what happens here. This is still page 39, so Act 2, Scene 4, about line 15. If ever thou shalt love, in the sweet pangs of it remember me, for such as I am all true lovers are, unstayed and skittish in all motions else, save in the constant image of the creature that is beloved. He's so proud of himself for remaining faithful to this image. And yet, what does he go on to say about women? Let thy love be younger than thyself. This is about line 36. Or thy affection cannot hold the bent, for women are as roses whose fair flower, being once displayed, doth fall that very hour. So there it is. He doesn't think women can reciprocate man's faithfulness. It's the man who should be the great, who can be the great lover. The woman is just fickle. And again, I think there's something to be said to Shakespeare's understanding here, that he understood in this Petrarchan love, you are loving a woman in the abstract, an image of a woman, not a real woman. You're not interacting with her. This is something Orlando had to be taught by Rosalind, that a woman has emotions, that you're going to deal with them in a marriage. Orsino is never looking forward to marriage in a reality because he's not looking forward to a real woman. And who teaches him what a real woman is? A woman, namely Viola in the person of Cesario. This is on page 42. Viola's already fallen in love with Orsino. And she's showing her nobility in that she's willing to take messages from him to Olivia. But this is Act 2, Scene 4, line 90. Say that some lady, as perhaps there is, hath for your love as great a pang of heart as you hath for Olivia. And Orsino says, that is impossible. I am a man. I'm the only true lover. Line 94, there is no woman's sides can bide the beating of so strong a passion as love doth give my heart. No woman's heart so big to hold so much. They lack retention. How can this man who claims to be so devoted to a woman have such contempt for women? Alas, their love may be called an appetite, no motion of the liver but the palate that suffers surfeit, climate, and revolt. But mine is all as hungry as the sea and can digest as much. Make no compare between that love a woman can bear me and that I owe Olivia. You see the narcissism of this kind of love here. It is that, oh, how great I am, the world's greatest lover, and no woman could equal that. And the Duke says, but what dost thou know? And Viola answers too well what love women to men may owe. Yes, of course, she's a woman. In faith, they are as true as hard as we. My father had a daughter, loved a man. As it might be, perhaps, were I a woman, I should, your lordship. What's her history? A blank, my lord. She never told her love. And here's, of course, she's speaking about herself, but let concealment, like a worm in the bud, feed on her damask cheek. She pined in thought, and with a green and yellow melancholy, she sat like Patience on a monument, smiling at grief. And there it is, a woman informing this man. Women have feelings too. And so again, you see how these characters, Orsino and Olivia, must break out of these stereotypes they have of men and women, of their habits of suffering, in order to achieve something real. Now, it will turn out to be a reordering of the affections. Here, Orsino will find he's in love with Olivia, with Viola, and Olivia will find she's in love with Sebastian, and indeed they will both discover there's something to be said in reciprocity in love. Especially in Orsino's case, he is wallowing in the idea that the only true love is an unreciprocated love. It's the love of a woman who doesn't return your affections. Here, page 57, Olivia has to learn, this is Act 3, Scene 1, line 158, but rather reason thus with reason fetter. Love sought is good, but given unsought is better. That's a complete turn on the Petrarchan tradition there. And similarly, towards the end, Orsino has to learn, page 99, this is Act 5, Scene 1, line 267. Boy, thou hast said to me 1,000 times, thou never shouldst love woman like to me. Prove it. I've lost Olivia, but do you really love me? Because that's going to be important now. And he does ask to see her in her women's clothing before he makes his final decision on this matter. But here, again, Shakespeare introduces this confusion into the play, these different roles, people switching their sex roles in the play, and suddenly they break out of this impasse, and by the end of the play, there's a kind of liberation in Illyria. Okay, I'll come back to the love story, and I'll come back to Sebastian in particular. But let me turn now, I'll get to it a little earlier than I thought I was going to, the story of Malvolio and the real politics of the play, which turn out to turn on religion. Now, in fact, this play largely turns on the story of Malvolio. Typically, great actors have been attracted to this play in order to play the role of Malvolio, no less than Obi-Wan Kenobi playing, Alec Guinness playing Malvolio, and that version that's up on YouTube. And Malvolio is a really interesting creation on Shakespeare's part, and I will simply go for the jugular here. Page 36. We learn who Malvolio is. This is Act 2, Scene 3, about line 140. Marius says, sometimes he is a kind of Puritan. If I thought that, I'd beat him like a dog. What, for being a Puritan? Exquisite reason, dear knight. I have no exquisite reason for it, but I have reason good enough. The devil a Puritan that he is, or anything constantly. But Malvolio is a Puritan. Now, our notes rather unhelpfully point out, a straight-laced, censorious person, Maria makes it clear that she is not using the label in a strict ecclesiastical sense. I'm sorry. Malvolio is a Puritan. And this is Shakespeare's portrait of a Puritan, and that's what makes the play so interesting in political terms. This is a remarkable play in political terms because it sets in opposition the Cavaliers and the Roundheads, the very forces that were to make up the English Civil War in 1642. That is, what looks like the subplot of the play is the comic conflict between Sir Toby Belch and Sir Andrew Aguecheek and Malvolio. That is, between two aristocrats and a Puritan. And those are the forces that lined up in the English Civil War. The Puritans or the Roundheads leading the rebellion against Charles I and his aristocracy. It's almost uncanny that Shakespeare saw already around 1600 when he wrote these plays exactly the forces that were going to tear England apart and exactly why. Let me say a few words about the Puritans now so that we will have a background, and I'll work this out in detail next time. The Puritans were a more radical Protestant sect than the Anglicans. I should say, first of all, that they did not call themselves Puritans. Puritan was a term imposed upon them by their enemies. It was a term of reproach. Oh, you Puritans. This often happens in religion. I guarantee you the Quakers didn't originally call themselves Quakers, and even the Methodists didn't originally call themselves Methodists. These were terms that were imposed upon them, that people that objected to them. Going back a bit to Henry VIII, 1535, as I said, as I've told you before, Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church in order to create a Protestant Church of England. Many Catholics opposed that, and Catholicism was restored under Queen Mary, and the Spanish sent an armada to try to restore England to Catholicism, and there was a lot of religious strife in Shakespeare's lifetime between the Protestant Anglicans and the Catholics. But that wasn't the only problem that the Anglicans faced. If you want to put it on a political spectrum, we could say Catholicism was the threat from the right, Puritanism was the threat from the left. Many Protestants felt that Henry VIII had not gone far enough in breaking with the Catholic Church, that in some ways he just renamed the Catholic Church the Church of England. He had just substituted himself as the head of the English Church for the Pope. Some of the things that these people that were then called Puritans objected to were the retaining of the ecclesiastical hierarchy of Catholicism. That is, the Anglican Church still had bishops and an Archbishop of Canterbury. There was still a very strict hierarchy in the church, and it was top down. The king was the supreme head of the Anglican faith and got to appoint the Archbishop of Canterbury, and so on. The Puritans wanted what we would call church democracy. In fact, they felt that congregations should run themselves. There shouldn't be bishops, there shouldn't be archbishops. And moreover, they objected to many aspects of the Catholic Church that had survived. As you may know, when the Puritans came to power, one of the things they did was to destroy all the religious art in England. They whitewashed the churches, destroyed centuries of beautiful medieval art. Almost no English Gothic art survives for just this reason. It was destroyed by the Puritans. You find it often in other countries where it was, I found an unbelievably beautiful work of English Gothic art in Naples when I was there last May. More beautiful than anything I've seen surviving in England. The Puritans, and here's where we start to get the meaning of the word Puritan as we use it today. The Puritans objected to the desecration of the Sabbath. They wanted the Sabbath to be a total holy day, so no parties on the Sabbath, no eating and drinking and wild parties on the Sabbath. All the things we associate with the Plymouth colony. And the Pilgrims coming to the U.S. In fact, I was very surprised. There actually is a reference to the Pilgrims in this play. If you turn to page 59, This is Act 3, Scene 2, line 32, where Andrew said, I had as lief be a Brownist as a politician. Now, your note here says Brownist, follower of William Brown. That's wrong. And I know that because I looked it up on Wikipedia. It's Robert Brown, and the Pilgrims were Brownists. The people that came to found the Plymouth colony were Brownists, followers of this guy Brown, who had left England because they were too radical as Protestants. They'd gone to the Netherlands. Some of you may know the story. And the Brownists were Congregationalists. They didn't believe in church hierarchy, bishops and archbishops. They wanted each congregation to organize itself. And in fact, thanks to Wikipedia, I learned that the Pilgrims were known as the Brownist emigration in the 17th century. Thank heavens for Wikipedia. But it's really quite extraordinary that Shakespeare mentions a Brownist in this play, because I think it makes the connections to radical Puritanism clearer. And everything you associate with the Plymouth colony and, no parties and sober dress and all that is what's associated with the Puritans. They wanted to purify the English church to make it more Protestant, more radically Protestant, get rid of the church hierarchy, honor the Sabbath, and one of the main things they wanted to do was to shut down the theaters. Now, this is during Shakespeare's own lifetime. One reason they were called Puritans is they thought the theater was impure, that the theater was a school of abuse, as one of the anti-theater Puritan pamphlets said, that plays showed things immoral on the stage. They encouraged immorality. And above all, these Puritans objected to the cross-dressing that was necessary to the Elizabethan stage. Because boys dressed up as women, that violated the Old Testament prohibition against men wearing women's clothing. So one of the chief cries you heard from the Puritan opposition to the English theater was, it's an abomination. The male dresses up as a female on the stage. Now, this was serious stuff during Shakespeare's lifetime, in part because of the political configuration of the day. The center of what we call Puritanism was the city of London. Puritanism, as we'll see in the case of Malvolio, was largely a middle-class, even lower middle-class phenomenon. The aristocracy was not Puritan. Certainly not with a small p in the Puritan. That is, the aristocracy was big on indulgence. Indeed, that's exactly what Shakespeare shows in Toby Belch and Andrew Aguecheek here. The aristocracy was the establishment, and so it supported the established church. The Anglican Church is very much part of the Elizabethan establishment, or as it's called more broadly, the Tudor establishment that Henry VIII brought into power. Was that these aristocrats ruled the country and had power over the church. The Puritan forces tended to be urban, middle class, and again centered in London. That's why Shakespeare's theater was not in London. It was outside the then city limits of London. Now, London is a vast, sprawling city now, but in Shakespeare's day, it was rather small. It was restricted to the region that the Roman wall had surrounded the Roman city of Londinium. If any of you know London, it's still called the city. What's called the city in London, which by the kind of synonymous with Wall Street, because that's where the financial center of London is. But when people refer to the city in London, they mean the old Roman city, the old boundaries of the city that were there in Shakespeare's day. The municipal authorities of London were not sympathetic to theaters. They were Puritan-leaning. Now again, there were England had an established Anglican church at this point, and you didn't openly start a new church then. In fact, it led to war over this issue, or in the case of these Brownists, they're going off to the Netherlands or to a godforsaken place known as Massachusetts. You could not have a public theater within the boundaries of the City of London. That's why, again, they built the theaters were originally, I think, in Shoreditch, the other side of the limits of London, and then they went to the south bank of the Thames, which was not part of incorporated London in those days. And there the theater was protected by aristocrats. Generally speaking, now Shakespeare's theater was very popular with the ordinary populace of London, but it wasn't popular, let's say, with the Lord High Mayor of London. Or with these kind of proto-Puritan authorities in London. So that's why the theater company needed aristocratic sponsorship. Shakespeare's company, originally the Lord Chamberlain's Men. There was an Admiral's Men company. Later, Shakespeare's theater company became the King's Men under King James I. They needed to be protected against these Puritan forces who wanted to shut down the theater. And eventually did. Just at the start of the Civil War in 1642, Parliament closed the theaters. Parliament, which was by then dominated by Roundhead forces, Puritan forces that were about to trigger the Civil War, which was a war between Charles I, his aristocratic supporters, and the Anglican Church with the middle class, the urban population, and these Puritans. Now, this was very important in Shakespeare's day. It's why he chose to make fun of Malvolio the Puritan in this play and to portray him in such a bad light. There was a lot at stake here for the English theater. They knew that if the Puritans would ever triumph, they would shut down the theater, and they did. In 1642, there was no theater in England until 1660, when the monarchy was restored under Charles II. One of the first things they did was reopen the theaters in London. Now, this is you see Puritans being made fun of all the time in Elizabethan and then Jacobean theater. I'll just refer to a few cases. Again, I'm trying to make plausible why next time I'm going to put so much emphasis on Malvolio as Puritan. Shakespeare's great contemporary, Ben Jonson, wrote two plays in which he makes fun of Puritans. One is called The Alchemist, in which a Puritan named Tribulation Wholesome wants to get the Philosopher's Stone to turn lead into gold so they can lead a revolution and take over England. The Puritans like to give themselves very holy names, and Johnson makes fun of this with a character named Tribulation Wholesome, and he also has the characters speak in that elaborate Puritan dialect that we know from period films about Plymouth Rock. And so on. And then Johnson's greatest play is a play called Bartholomew Fair, in which there's a Puritan named Zeal of the Land Busy, who spends much of the play inveighing against the fair. This is Bartholomew Fair is just a fair, a kind of, we would call it a country fair. It's a real fair outside London where people go and they indulge themselves in food and sex and other things. And there's also a theater. There's a puppet theater at the Bartholomew Fair, and Zeal of the Land Busy attacks it, and he complains that the men dress up as women, and in the great culminating moment, the puppets throw up their little clothing and show they have no sex organs. So there's nothing wrong. We're neutral. We're neuter. We're not men masquerading as women. And Zeal of the Land Busy is totally humiliated. It's one of the funniest moments in Renaissance theater. And I highly commend this play to you if you ever get a chance to see it. But again, it was quite routine in Shakespeare's day to make fun of the Puritans on the stage. The theater knew on which side its bread was buttered. That, in fact, it was the aristocrats supporting them and the Puritans opposing them. And so we get the great confrontation here in the play. On the one hand, we have Andrew Aguecheek and Sir Toby Belch. Now, Sir Toby Belch is a lot like Falstaff, you may have recognized. He's a party animal. He loves drinking. Shakespeare does not try to glamorize the aristocracy here. Now, he felt there were many great men among the aristocrats. And he's shown them in Hotspur and Prince Hal. But he also was aware that a lot of the aristocracy wasn't that impressive. And indeed, we see here Sir Andrew Aguecheek is portrayed as a coward. No Hotspur he will run from a battle. Toby Belch is portrayed as a drunk. Again, I don't want you to think that Shakespeare was blind to the limitations of an actual aristocracy. He knew how empty many of these people were in their claims to greatness. Nevertheless, when it came down to choosing between the aristocracy and the Puritans, Shakespeare knew which side he was on. Page 34. So this is Act 2, Scene 3, line 87, where Malvolio appears saying, "My masters, are you mad? Well, what are you? Have you no wit, manners, nor honesty, but to gabble like tinkers at this time of night? Do you make an alehouse of my lady's house, that you squeak out your catches without any mitigation or remorse of voice? Is there no respect of place, persons, nor time in you?" And so we'll be exploring this next time, but here's what Malvolio stands for. All the middle-class virtues, the virtues that the Puritans had, the virtues of thrift, of industry, of self-discipline, of standing up for order. And what does Toby reply to this? Page 35, Act 2, Scene 3, line 113. "Out of tune, sir, ye lie, and art any more than a steward. Dost thou think, because thou art virtuous, there shall be no more cakes and ale?" Shakespeare's great answer to Puritanism. And really, this is deeply in the spirit of the play. Again, a festive comedy, as C.L. Barber calls these plays. Twelfth Night, that refers us to Christmas. Twelfth Night is January 6th. The day of the Epiphany, when the wise men showed up to honor the Christ child. The 12th day of Christmas, we would say. That's what this play is about. We think it may have been produced for a law school Christmas party at the Middle Temple, or maybe for something at court. But it is somehow in this festive spirit of Christmas. We should be celebrating life. We should be enjoying it. We should be drinking ale, and we should be eating cakes. And what Shakespeare objects to is anything that tries to tamp that down. And he sees it again from the point of view of the theater. The theater celebrates carnival, at least in comedy. The theater is itself a kind of festive event. In Shakespeare's day, it was so clear. You left the precincts of London, crossed the river, went over to this area on the South Bank, which specialized in three things: brothels, bear baiting, and the theater. The three big forms of entertainment in Elizabethan England. And it was a kind of holiday spirit that prevailed within the plays, and that Shakespeare was celebrating. And we see here in this play the great threat to that. The great threat to Shakespeare's theater and the threat to the joy of life itself, this radical form of Protestantism, Puritanism, which doesn't want any amusements on the Sabbath day, which wants people to lead a sober, restrained existence. And again, everything you picture with Massachusetts Puritans would be applicable for understanding this play. And indeed, it's so fascinating that Shakespeare, without mentions the Brownists in this play, who were the pilgrims who left for America. So that's the way in which this play is political, because it raises this religious issue. And next time on Thursday, we will explore the character of Malvolio, Shakespeare's extraordinary portrait of the Puritan and its connection to the middle class.